1,000 fans got on planes for a match that technically didn't even exist yet. No trophy, no official scoreline, not even a promise that the player they'd crossed an ocean for would spend more than 20 minutes on court. So why would anyone drain their savings, burn a vacation day, and fly across the world to watch a glorified practice session? Stick around, because the answer is weirder than it sounds. By the end of this, you'll understand why grown men who've beaten Grand Slam champions are now admitting on camera that the crowd isn't screaming for them anymore. Her name is Alex. Remember it because in 12 months, she went from unknown to unavoidable, and not even her coaches, her rivals, or tournament organizers can fully explain how it happened this fast. Let's rewind. Not to New York, not yet. Rewind to a version of Alex almost nobody outside the sport could pick out of a lineup. She wasn't filling arenas. She wasn't trending. She was doing the invisible, unglamorous grind every unranked player does, chasing wildcards, chasing points, chasing a seat at a table that kept staying shut. Tell her a year ago that a doubles exhibition featuring her would sell 23,000 seats before the real tournament even started, and she'd have laughed and gone back to practice. It starts, of all places, in Toronto. Nobody circled Toronto on their calendar. It was supposed to be a routine stop, a young player picking up experience against bigger names. Then the stands began filling in a way nobody had planned for. Flags with nothing to do with Canada, chants with nothing to do with the host crowd, colors that told you exactly where these people's loyalties actually lived. 12,000 plus, growing every round. Here's the part that should give you chills. Tennis crowds are trained to stay quiet. Applause between points, silence during the rally golf level etiquette. Around Alex, that unwritten rule started dissolving. The silence cracked. The noise got louder, stranger, more personal, closer to a football crowd than a tennis one. And she felt it before anyone wrote a headline about it. But here's the twist. Toronto wasn't the peak. It was the warning shot. A crowd showing up for an underdog is one thing. A crowd showing up for a winner is something else entirely. So the real question became, what happens the moment she starts actually beating the players she's supposed to lose to? Washington answered that, and it blew everything open. Not a nice run of title. Her first one, and she didn't win it against a nobody. She took down a top 3 player live, in front of a crowd that had believed in her long before there was any proof to believe in. Now, there was proof. The story flipped from hope to evidence, and evidence changes everything. Before Washington, the question in the locker room was simple. Can she compete? After Washington, it got heavier. How far can this go? And for whoever got drawn against her next, an even more uncomfortable question started forming. What does it feel like to walk out, knowing thousands of strangers have already cast you as the villain in someone else's story? One veteran opponent who's dealt with hostile crowds before admitted something rare. The noise wasn't just loud. It was disorienting. It bent the psychology of the match itself. Every big point set off a wave of sound. Neutral ground stopped existing. And strangely, even the players getting buried under that noise admitted there was something magnetic about it, like getting caught in a storm you can't help but respect. The fans weren't spectating anymore. They'd become part of the scoreboard. Then, right as the story seemed headed for an unstoppable rise, Cincinnati. 3rd round. A brutal marathon that swung back and forth deep into the night, and she lost. Momentum gone? Story over, right? A losing player usually clears a stadium in minutes. People check their phones, grab their jackets, beat the traffic. That's not what happened here. They stayed. Past midnight. Flags still up, in a building that had every reason to be half empty. Every time she clawed back a point in a match she couldn't possibly still win, the crowd reacted like the whole outcome could be rewritten by noise alone. It couldn't. They knew it couldn't. And they stayed anyway. Sit with that, because that's the moment the story stopped being about winning and quietly became about something far more dangerous for every future opponent. Loyalty. A crowd that only shows up when you're winning is made of fair-weather admirers. A crowd that stays deep into the night watching a match it knows is already lost isn't a fan base anymore. It's an attachment, an identity. They weren't tracking a scoreline. They were tracking her. And that kind of bond doesn't shrink under brighter lights. it grows. Which brings us to where all of this was always heading: New York, Flushing Meadows, the loudest, most unforgiving stage in the sport. And this time, the phenomenon didn't wait for the main draw to politely start. It showed up early, uninvited, overwhelming, at what was supposed to be a low-stakes exhibition. 23,000 seats, not mostly full, completely full. Final match energy for a warm-up. And once again, the entire building bent toward a 21-year-old who a year earlier was still fighting just to get into these rooms at all. This match carried extra weight, to something personal underneath the spectacle. Her opponent across the net had beaten her twice before, not a stat of debt, sitting in the back of her mind every time she bounced the ball before serving. So this wasn't just a test of whether crowd energy could translate to real results on a Grand Slam stage, it was a chance to erase a ghost. And in front of a sold-out house holding its breath, she did exactly that. She won. 2 painful losses stopped being the story and became history. Buried under a roar that didn't sound like a reaction to an exhibition, it sounded like something personal being settled. Something the crowd had been carrying alongside her the whole time. That's when the pattern became impossible to write off as coincidence. Toronto revealed it. Washington amplified it. Cincinnati stress tested it. New York confirmed it was real, permanent, and still growing. Here's a question almost nobody thought to ask until now. What does it feel like to stand 2 feet away from someone when an entire stadium belongs to them, not to you? Because Alex wasn't out there alone, she had a doubles partner, and not some unproven rookie riding along. This was an established, decorated pro, a former Grand Slam semifinalist, an Olympic medalist, someone who, on paper, should have been the bigger name in that partnership, the one drawing the eyes. Instead, he said something almost nobody in an individual sport ever admits out loud. He wasn't generating the electricity in that building. He was standing inside somebody else's storm, just trying to keep up. Think about how upside down that is. Tennis runs on ego, on rankings, on Ursum's stacked like armor, and here was a decorated veteran essentially handing over the atmosphere to his 21-year-old partner. Because he'd already felt the walls shake in Canada, and knew New York wouldn't just repeat it, it would double it, with nowhere to hide. That admission matters, because it proves this has stopped being contained to Alex alone. Opponents feel it, teammates feel it, broadcasters feel it, tournament directors quietly reshuffling court assignments feel it. And somewhere underneath all of it, Alex has to feel it too, every single day, in ways that never show up on a stat sheet. There's a word for what builds under fame like this, and it isn't excitement, it's weight. Alex has talked about that weight directly, not the ordinary pre-match nerves every athlete deals with, but something heavier, the pressure of knowing thousands of people have wrapped their pride and identity around whether you win or lose a match you never asked them to care this much about. Picture it, you walk out to serve and the first thing you see isn't the baseline, it's a wall of your country's colors staring back. You hear your own name chanted before the first ball is struck. You know, with total certainty, that one clean winner triggers an explosion and one unforced error lands on thousands of people who desperately want you to succeed. That's not ordinary pressure. That's love, weaponized into expectation, whether anyone meant it that way or not. And here's the contradiction that keeps this story from flattening into something simple. Alex has described this exact feeling as heavy and in almost the same breath, as fun, chaotic, surreal, overwhelming in the best and worst sense at once. Both things are true. And that refusal to be one clean emotion is exactly why the story keeps pulling people back in, because the same crowd noise that lifts her into moments she couldn't reach alone is the same noise that could one day crush her, if a loss ever lands on the wrong stage at the wrong moment. Which means the real story from here isn't really about the fans anymore, it's about whether she can control the very thing she built. Because eventually, support curdles into expectation, and expectation becomes its own opponent, one that never shows up on a bracket and can't be scouted on film. Former doubles legends who've spent decades reading momentum in packed arenas have said it plainly. Beating her now isn't just about beating her forehand or her return, it's about surviving the environment she brings onto the court with her, one that punishes opponents psychologically before the match even tightens. What happens the instant she hits a clean winner in 20? 0-0 people detonate at once? What happens in the final suffocating moments of a close match when one player desperately needs stillness and the other has an entire stadium supplying oxygen? At that point, you're not just playing Alex, you're playing inside an atmosphere that belongs to her, one you can't train for, simulate, or silence. That's exactly why this phenomenon resists easy measurement. Rankings can be counted. Titles can be counted. Attendance gets printed in a report the next morning. But how do you put a number on the gut punch of walking into a stadium and realizing the emotional momentum already belongs to the person across the net? You can't chart it. But everyone who stood on that baseline against her feels it instantly, in their chest. And the timing makes it even harder to dismiss as noise, because the results are climbing right alongside the crowds, not lagging behind them. A career-high ranking inside the top 20, 7 wins over top 10 opponents in a single season, a statement-making run at Wimbledon, a maiden tour-level title earned by beating elite competition, not backing into it. This isn't a manufactured storyline propped up by hype. The fans aren't cheering for a promise anymore, they're reacting to proof, fresh proof, tournament after tournament, each result adding fuel to a fire that already looks uncontrollable. Now all of that momentum is walking straight into the loudest room in the sport, the US Open. The biggest stage tennis has, filled with former world, Grand Slam champions, home crowd American favorites who should, by every logical measure, be soaking up the spotlight themselves. And somehow, again and again, that spotlight keeps sliding sideways toward a 21-year-old who was fighting for wildcards this time last year. That's the real transformation, and it's easy to miss if you're only watching the scoreline. It isn't that she got better, plenty of players get better. It's that people started expecting her to be better, publicly, loudly, with plane tickets already bought on that expectation. Real expectation is one of the most dangerous forces in sports, because supporting a winning streak is effortless. Anyone can cheer when the outcome's already trending your way. The real test comes the moment things stop going to plan, when the first set slips away, when an opponent finally solves the puzzle nobody else could, when the crowd's energy shifts from celebration to held breath. That moment will define whatever comes next, because it forces a question no ranking or highlight reel can answer in advance. Can she carry that crowd without letting the crowd carry her instead? Can she use 20,000 strangers as fuel without getting trapped underneath what they expect her to deliver? Can she still be the same relentless player who once had to fight tooth and nail for a seat at this table, now that thousands are demanding she deliver on command? Nobody knows yet, not her coaches, not her rivals, not the analysts breaking down every match frame by frame. And that uncertainty, that total absence of a guaranteed ending, is exactly why this story refuses to sit still. This isn't a retrospective on a superstar looking back fondly at the moment she made it. This is happening live, unfinished, unresolved. The crowds keep growing, the expectations keep getting heavier, the stages keep getting brighter, and every tournament carries the real possibility of rewriting the whole narrative overnight in either direction. Maybe she wins again, and the phenomenon outgrows anything tennis has seen from someone this young in years. Maybe she loses, and the crowd stays anyway, proving Cincinnati wasn't a fluke, but a preview. Maybe the pressure eventually gets too heavy even for her. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that should genuinely terrify everyone left in her path, she figures out exactly how to turn all of that pressure into raw, controlled power. Nobody can predict which version of this story comes next. But look at what's already happened, undeniably, in front of everyone. 3,000 people crossing an ocean for a session that wasn't even a real match. Stadiums in cities with nothing to do with her turning into something close to home games anyway. A brutal loss that somehow kept a crowd in their seats past midnight instead of sending them home early. An exhibition generating championship final noise. A decorated veteran partner openly admitting he was riding a wave that belonged to someone else. Opponents feeling the atmosphere shift before the first serve is even struck. This stopped being a simple fan base a while ago because a fan base watches, and this follows. A fan base cheers when you win, and this stays when you lose. A fan base buys a ticket, and this crosses oceans without blinking. And maybe that's the real reason it keeps getting bigger every single time it feels like it's already peaked, because underneath all of it, this was never only about tennis. It's about what happens when enough people watch a young athlete fight her way into rooms nobody was sure she'd ever enter, and quietly decide they're walking through those doors right beside her, whatever it costs, however far it takes them. So as the tournament pushes deeper, as the rounds get more dangerous and the margin for error shrinks toward nothing, the real question was never whether she'd have support. That's already been answered, definitively, in 3 cities and counting. The flags are already there. The chants are already there. The belief is already sitting in the stands, waiting. The only question left, the one nobody can answer for her, is what she chooses to do with all of it. Because eventually the noise fades, the lights dim, the flags come down, and she's left standing alone at the baseline with one ball in her hand and one impossible question in her head. Can she still be exactly who she's always been? Now that everyone around her needs her to be something more? That, more than any scoreline, is the real test waiting in the next chapter. She's already proven she can build a crowd. She's already proven she can make people believe. What's left is whether she can carry that belief without ever letting it become the thing that breaks her stride. A year ago, almost nobody outside the sport was asking how far this could go. Now people are crossing oceans just to watch her take the next step. And if the last 12 months have proven anything, it's this: every time the world assumes it's finally seen the ceiling, she finds a way to make everyone look up again. Bigger crowds, heavier expectations, brighter lights, and somehow, impossibly, the story just keeps getting louder from here. Which means the real question was never whether this was real. Everyone in those stadiums already knows it is. The only question left standing is how far it can actually go. Because if the last year is any preview, betting against her and against the thousands of people who've already decided they're not going anywhere might be the single riskiest bet left in this entire tournament.